I'd like to invite Michelle Brick, who's a Senior Director of Real-Time Payments and Digital Integration at Royal Bank of Canada, and she's going to be talking about RTP and ISO adoption.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and really happy to join you all in person today. It's nice to be back at these forums and see faces and chat. As I was introduced, I'm Michelle Brick. I work at Royal Bank of Canada, and today I'm here to give you a bit of an update on our payments modernization journey, along with some, very early insights on ISO data that we're seeing, with some introduction of some new features we've put into Interac e-transfer last year. So about a year ago, we did a couple of things with Interac. And Interac, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a comparable to TCH here in the US. And what we did about a year ago was, in addition to the P2P e-transfers we've been offering for about 20 years, we added a new e-transfer focused on businesses, where it would be an account number rooted e-transfer as opposed to an alias-based transfer. In addition to being an account-based payment, we also introduced ISO. And the ISO 20022 content that we actually included isn't a full cross-border ISO payload. We took a look at what was available in the ISO message, and we skinned it down to about 70 fields. We didn't really feel like the Swiss tax codes were necessary for a domestic Canadian payment, so those could come out. And we just skinned it down because that ISO data actually travels with the payment, so we needed to optimize a little bit. So when we launched that, a year ago, we've had a bit of experience seeing what kind of data has started to come through and where we see the adoption happening. The other thing that happened was, in addition to creating, the e-transfer with ISO, we also had in market already, we've had it for about 5 years, a request for payment. We actually call it request money. And that request for payment has predominantly been offered to consumers. And so it's a very small uptake, really, in relative terms, because it's mainly offered to consumers, and they don't think about it the same way as businesses do. So what we did was we enabled that ISO, or that request money message, to have ISO data, and now we are able to offer it in bulk services to corporates, to businesses who obviously would be much more interested in that data. And we're starting to see some uptick in their use of that. These are, the use cases for request for pay, and I think Dean said it, and I loved it, right? It has to be win, 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 or win, neutral, neutral, but it cannot be win, lose anybody, right? And so, my own experience says, talking to our customers, our business customers in particular, is that what's in it for them? Why is a business going to move from getting a sure, ACH credit to, letting the consumer push the button? And I know we talk a lot about what the consumer needs, and I think the consumer does need these things, alternatives for bill pay. But at the same time, until we get businesses hooked and sold on the need for it, then the adoption curve could be quite extensive and long. We do see adoption, in the urgent payment space, of course, insurance companies being interested in being able to pay out claims immediately, natural disasters, all those use cases. Absolutely, there's a use case for those payments. So on the data side, these numbers are, in relative terms of our total payment volumes, very small. But the curve is still interesting. We're starting to see where, when customers are using it, they're bringing it in as a new organic payment that they have on their shelf, along with our other payments. We're starting to see them get interested in adding some of the data to those payments and sharing it between the senders and the receivers. The interesting thing is that most of so we call it a bulk service, it's a batch form of real-time payments, if you will. The majority of the data is included on batch payments, which, from a corporate or business perspective makes a lot of sense because they have the capability and they're doing those things in a batch way today. And so they continue that pattern and can offer the data through those payments. On the real-time side, what we call real-time here, meaning, UI that's going to go straight through to the clearing, to the exchange, those tend to be, less data coming into on those payments than in the batch. Some of the other interesting, I found this one actually very interesting because we assume, when you would have launched an account-based payment with ISO, that corporates would have used both the account-based and the ISO. Not so much. Turns out they're still sending to consumers predominantly because they're using the Alias database. So they're using an email address or an SMS number, showing that these are really business to consumer payments at the moment. And of course, small business, Canada's economy really depends on small business, yet where we see the adoption so far is in corporate. What is the data? What are they using it for? It's not going to be a surprise to anyone here, so spoiler alert, it's invoices, it's invoice numbers, it's the exchange of that full loop of information. But what we do see is that even though there are many repeats, these messages are so large, they stick to one. It's one-to-one, and it's pretty basic use of the ISO message at this point. And finally, kind of data, it is the invoice number. Really, that's all it is. Invoice numbers ruling the message. So on the more broad note of what's happening in Canada on payments modernization, we have really 3 files that we're following. The introduction of a new real-time rail. And what that really will mean for our Interac e-transfers is that there's a new way of clearing and settling the payments. So to consumers and businesses in Canada, when RTR comes live, there will not be an incremental change to them. Everything will be happening in the background in terms of that clearing and settlement. Everything that they have currently in the payment set continues, and they will continue to enjoy the payments that they've had in the market. On the high value, we've recently finished introducing the technology in the center to cope with the MX message set. And so we're all preparing for the same date, I'm sure you are, in 2025 when SWIFT ends support for the MT messages. But we're pretty well through the worst of the work there. And then, of course, interesting for us as well, similar to what Alison talked about, she mentioned about coming into the FedNow sponsoring, banks sponsoring, non-FIs. We have work underway in Canada to expand the rails for non-FIs as well. And it's a different model than a sponsorship model. It is actually where they will be able to come direct to the rail. And that work continues. Legislation is being drafted, and we're waiting to see how that plays out in the next year or so. But more interesting are some of the things that we're thinking about, and it's very interesting to hear folks here because the same sorts of things that we've been thinking, on the e-commerce side, digital payments, so e-wallets, and offering alternatives to some of the wallets is certainly a area of focus for us at RBC in the next couple of years. And also the introduction of cross-border instant. So I know Swift Instant, Swift Go, these are all things that we are very focused on over the next few years and think that they'll be fairly transformational for Canadians. And that's it. If there's any questions, I know I went through that really fast, wanted to catch you up. There's a question? Yeah.
So you mentioned that small business is a key part of the Canadian economy. Why do you think they're lagging the corporates in terms of adopting these new payment types?
Yeah, so one of the things I didn't mention, so thanks for the question, is that the reach of our instant account number payments right now is about 90% on the receive side. And while that's high, what we're all still working on is starting to integrate into all of our channels that all of our business customers use. So no doubt many of you offer multiple channels to your business segments as well. And across the Canadian banks, we all have similar challenges. So I think you'll see more come online as we all continue to develop. It's only been 1 year. This is like 1 year of data. So it's very early days, but we should expect to see more. Yeah.
Should I go to the mic?
I can hear you.
Talk loud. When's your real time coming on? And when do you want to work with a partner on US Canadian dollar?
Yeah, so I was I was sad to hear you're dealing with Europe first. I said, well, geez, yeah, no, we really want to look at that cross border with the U.S. I mean, we have so many flows and we hear so many complaints, particular to the U.S. You know, we all have cross border international challenges, but from our businesses, it's especially predominant about the U.S. So we should definitely need to talk about that soon. And the RTR work right now, it's currently slated for 2023, subject to some confirmation around, you know, replanning that may need to happen, you know, subject to, you know, normal technology stuff. Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.